I'm still a bit behind on adding videos for the Fantasy for Real football show onto the YouTube channel, but futures are my absolute favorite, and I wanted to make sure my first positional run through for the 2025 rookie class made it to YouTube. The full podcast, including a bit more context, can be found under the Fantasy for Real title wherever you get your podcasts. With all that said, let's get into some 2025 way too early rankings. The deepest and most exciting prospect group by far in the 2025 class in terms of early evaluations is the group of running backs. Now, there's obviously all kinds of doubts that are going to go around about specifically the running back position when it comes to things like NIL, because the running back position does not get drafted very highly at the NFL level and does not make as much money at the NFL level, which does make the relative scale a little bit closer. And I do think that is a valid thing to at least think about as we move ahead in running back rankings. I don't know how big of a difference it's going to make, and it's probably never going to make a difference for the actual premium talents, the top flight guys, right? Like Trevion Henderson has flashed that top end talent before, but I don't think he's actually shown it consistently enough that any team would have been considering drafting him in the first round, maybe not even the top 35, 40 picks. So if the top end guys, I think, are always going to be coming out, but there's definitely a chance that more guys are staying at the collegiate level with the advancement of NIL and things like that. Unlike with the quarterback position, where I separate it by early declares and non-early declares, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm just going to do it by more like a rough tiered order. I'm going to go kind of recap the position at the end to kind of get the strong, more clear impression of where I am on these players. But to begin, there's just a couple guys that I think have the real highest level upside, and because we're trying to project, because it's not really about what they've done so far necessarily, particularly at this position. It's more about what they can be physically combined with some of what they've done. I do list Nicholas Singleton first here just because he is the running back more than all the other guys that I think could become a nearly first round NFL pick. I think his upside is the highest of anybody on this list. 21 years, 8 months on my age list as of September 1st, 2025. 6 foot, 226 pounds. He was the elite high school prospect in his class, so he was the guy that a lot of people were excited about coming into college, and then his freshman year was absolutely amazing. His freshman year, I mean, I'm not saying that every single thing he did was perfect, but it's a freshman year, and he had so many amazing, explosive plays. I think it might be one of the best highlight films from college in the last couple of years. Again, you can critique some other things about his game, but the explosion, the way he moved forward, and at such a big size is a very significant thing. That said, the play fell off substantially in terms of production, in terms of generating explosive plays from 2022 to 2023. He had half as many carries in his sophomore year of 15 plus yards. Now, he was turning it around a little bit at the end of the year, and he also, one thing that I wanted to make a mention of is he's one of these running backs that tried to add a bit of weight, and I mean, that makes sense. He's a young guy. You don't know what your perfect playing weight's going to be, but I do think he might have added a little bit of too much weight to the extent where it got a little bit of bad weight, but you never know how these things are going to ebb and flow within a season. The bottom line is, I think the thing with Nick Singleton is if you flipped him around, and the first year was a little bit disappointing, but the second year was what we saw in the first year, and he was coming off this season with all these explosive runs, I think it'd be very consensus to have Nick Singleton as the RB1 in this class. I don't think it's fair to compare them as the exact same thing, but I do think that the upside to be the RB1, basically nothing standing in his way, right? If everybody else has a great season, but Nicholas Singleton has a great season, I think Nicholas Singleton's the RB1, and so that's why I'm mentioning him first. It is also worth noting that while his overall season was a little bit more disappointing, he did show a little bit more upside as a pass catcher. I think running back profiles, more than at any other position, I feel a little bit okay with taking little bits and pieces from different seasons and putting them together because of the way roles can change in a given season. And in the second year, he did see an increase in his passing volume. He had 30 targets. He caught a good number of them. He has shown a little bit of drops in his career, but that's just something to keep in mind as it is a small sample so far. But Nick Singleton is a player who I am pretty excited about still, despite the fact that he is coming off of a fairly disappointing year. So next up, the next two running backs on this list both attend Ohio State. I'm going to talk about Trevion Henderson first, even though he is the player that could have come out this year, because even though he is one of the older running backs on this list, at least compared to a lot of the explosive high upside guys that I'm the most excited about, Trevion Henderson is a player who is still this guy who has a lot of upside. And if you look at certain games from the 2023 season in particular, even in the 2021 season when he was a freshman, you can see the ability to be even a first round pick. He will be 22 years, 10 months as of September 1st, 2025, which is, a little bit older because of the fact that he stayed for his senior season. He is 5'10", 212 pounds, and he has shown some specific flaws in two areas, specifically durability and consistency. Now, he has only fumbled once in 445 carries, so that's at least one area of consistency that he scores very highly in. But in general, he has been a player where, if you talk to Ohio State fans, at times there were a lot of people who were saying, we like Mayan Williams better. And that's probably because Mayan Williams, being the size he is, being the bowling ball running back he is, generates so much consistency on a down-to-down basis, whereas Trevion Henderson has the explosive playmaking ability to make the big play anytime he touches the ball. And he's super explosive, but that's kind of the main thing, is that despite being 212 pounds, he does not necessarily play at a big size, right? So 212 pounds might still be an advantage for him just from the fact that perceived durability and the size and the way coaches look at you, that's always going to be an important thing. And he looks way different than even a running back like Kenneth Walker, who did weigh in at 209 pounds, but there is a big difference when you look at the frame of these two guys. But as someone who's watched them both play a lot of running back, Kenneth Walker is a way more natural tackle breaker, even to similarly quality tackle attempts. So it's not like one guy's breaking weaker tackles, or I'm only talking about smaller guys because Kenneth Walker's a smaller guy. I mean, generally speaking, the exact same guy taking the exact same approach, Kenneth Walker is far more likely to break the tackle than Trevion Henderson. This is just one random example. The point is that Trevion Henderson looks 212 pounds. Sometimes even he has such a big frame, but he does not always consistently break high-level tackle attempts. And so if he could just improve that balance just a little bit, if he could prove his durability, just a little, be durable for this year, I should say, if he could show a little bit more consistency on a down-to-down basis, these are things that can turn him into an elite running back for what we do. Once again, he's also flashed in the passing game as well. And again, the Wisconsin game is just one game I bring up because that was one game in the middle of the year where it finally started turning back to the hype that he had as a freshman, right? So when he was a freshman, people were really, really excited about Trevion Henderson, and then he did play through a broken foot his sophomore year, but despite playing through the broken foot, a disappointing season is going to disappoint people. And then the junior year wasn't necessarily up to snuff with, what we were hoping to see as a continued progression. But there was a stretch of games in the middle of the season where it finally looked like it was starting to click back again. And one of the games that was particularly impressive in that stretch was the Wisconsin game. And I just remember watching the Wisconsin game and it was like, okay, he's completely dominating a Big Ten team on his own. This is what we've wanted to see for years. It didn't happen consistently enough, but if the player who played Wisconsin shows up consistently on Saturdays, Trevion Henderson's going to be a guy who rises up quite a bit. The other running back I want to talk about is Quinshon Judkins, of course. 21 years, 10 months as of September 1st, 2025, 5'11", 210 pounds. He had a ridiculous freshman breakout playing for Ole Miss in the SEC. He was the best running back in the SEC that year, and he shows all of the traits that you're really looking for a running back to translate to the next level. He has patience at the line, he's explosive at the line, he has good physicality and long speed. He's pretty much the most complete package as a runner in this group, and he's probably the most likely to be the running back one, I would say, even though I'm listing 3 guys here. I'm listing the other 2 higher because I do think they have higher upside in their explosive capabilities, but they don't do some of the other things as well as Judkins does, including just break tackles. There is something natural beyond your size, obviously, about your ability to break tackles, and Judkins has it in spades compared to a guy on his own team like Trevion Henderson. Now, by getting to see these 2 guys on the same field together, that's very intriguing. We're going to be able to see, side by side, who is the better running back potentially, and that's going to probably cause one of these guys to rise up quite a bit and one of these guys to fall down quite a bit, even though at the end of the day, they might be 2 of the top 3 running backs in college football, or at least that's one potential outcome of what could go on here. But Quinshon Judkins does a lot of the things that these guys don't do. There's also one thing that I'm not sure how to approach because it is very hearsay based, but the bottom line is no one's going to be saying, oh, Ole Miss, they really like Quinshon Judkins on the way out. No, there is some animosity on the way out between Quinshon Judkins and Ole Miss. But to just end it on something more football related, on that spirit of being the most well-rounded, he also scores the best in a PFF scale on these top 3 running backs I'm talking about. The top 3 are specific to me because, like I always say, running back is the most traits-driven position. So these are the guys that check the most traits boxes to me. So these are the guys who the production matters the most to me between them, but not necessarily for other players. Production is not going to let other players catch up to guys who have production and superior traits at this running back position. It can happen to an extent at wide receiver, depending on how you're defining traits, but it's not going to happen at running back. If all 3 of those guys are productive, those are probably my top 3 running backs, unless someone shows me traits that are beyond. It doesn't matter how many 300-yard games someone has. It doesn't matter how many 2,000-yard seasons someone has. Someone's got to show me more traits than those 3 guys to jump into that tier if they are productive. That's still a big if. If a guy like Nicholas Singleton has a second disappointing season, that might change some things, especially because, you have to start asking yourself more serious questions about the reasons that he has a disappointing season. Right now, we can maybe just chalk it up into some randomness, you can just hope that he does a little bit better. This is a really young guy, might have gained a little bit too much weight for the start of the year, extremely explosive, does everything you really want to see, maybe not as consistently as Quinshon Judkins. So these 3 players, Nicholas Singleton, Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, are the top 3. The next guy I actually want to talk about here is Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State, who will be 21 years, 9 months as of September 1st, 2025, 5'9", 210 pounds. Now, maybe the 210 pounds, it's so weird looking at weight, and I understand that so many people are going to be mad at me, especially on social media posts, when you really project what you think about someone's size outside of their weight because you're just looking at a camera vision. But what I'll say is that I just talked about some players that weigh in at 210, 212, 215, and Trevion Henderson is way bigger than Ashton Jeanty. All right, so maybe he is 210 pounds, but he does look light. And I also wrote down on my notes here, Trey Benson weighed in at 6 pounds heavier than this guy. And there's no way Trey Benson plays 6 pounds heavier than Ashton Jeanty. So there's going to be levels, red flags, there's going to be size red flags, right? Boise State does not play in a major conference. They don't even play in the American Athletic Conference, which I would consider the next man up on the conference scale. They might get games against Oregon State and Washington State this year because of the dissolution of the pack, but that's not really the biggest difference in a schedule, because the big advantage of playing for a Big Ten, for an SEC, especially moving forward now that the Big Ten has solidified itself as being not just a number 2, but potentially a competitor to the SEC with Oregon, Washington, USC. Now we really have 2 conferences where people are going to be playing high-level competition on a consistent basis. You're not going to get that in the Mountain West. No offense to the Mountain West, especially at the level we care about, right? Sometimes people will bring up things like, well, these teams score really well on this SP+. And it's well, it doesn't matter how good of a college team they are. It matters how much NFL talent they are. So the bottom line is Ashton Jeanty, the guys who are tackling him, aren't NFL talent. They're consistently not NFL talent to a far greater extent than people who play in the Big Ten and the SEC. That said, Ashton Jeanty is the best receiving back in this class, and he is maybe the best receiving back that I have maybe ever evaluated outside of Jahmyr Gibbs, right? Jahmyr Gibbs definitely has to get that kind of respect too. But on pure receiving, though, Ashton Jeanty's honestly pretty close to me. He had 48 targets this year, and he was recorded with having 0 drops. He has a very interesting backstory, and I usually don't like to talk about backstory things, but this one's particularly interesting because he's a military kid, and he grew up overseas, or at least spent significant time during his middle school, high school years overseas, and played in football teams in leagues that were very, very bad, and so he basically had to play every position. So he's played a lot of running back, and he's played a lot of receiver, and so this kind of goes to his versatile skill set that you really do see on the field. And then he's great at forcing missed tackles. Now, again, the guys he's forcing missed tackles from are not going to play at the NFL level, most likely. The biggest gap in talent that people don't realize between these conferences, because they see teams play well sometimes, is that you don't realize that when you go to the NFL and you go, okay, well, how many players in the Mountain West on defense were drafted this year? And it's 1, 2. These are the number of defensive players that are usually drafted on minor conferences every single year. So I've probably gotten stuck on it too much, but the point is that Ashton Jeanty, there's so many things that I love. He's very close to just being in that top 3 to me because of how important pass catching is. He's someone that every time I look into him, I like him a little bit more than I did before. It's just hard to put that projection on somebody when the other two guys, they're going to play at Ohio State, at Penn State, in the Big Ten. They're going to play some of the best defenses, some of the best defensive talent. They're going to play teams that put in more defensive players per team than the conference that Ashton Jeanty plays in. So that is a very big thing to think about. But at the end of the day, Ashton Jeanty is probably the closest player to running back 4 on my list. Next up, Trevor Etienne, the running back of Georgia, a transfer from Florida, and yes, the younger brother of Travis. That's also going to be very annoying eventually, considering that they both not only start with T, but TR. I've already said it multiple times. I've mixed them both up. I say Trevor more often than Travis because I'm so into prospects that I think about, the projection of Trevor Etienne way more than Travis Etienne. Travis Etienne is a settled a thing for me. But anyway, the point is Trevor Etienne, a very young running back, 21 years, 2 months as of September 1st, 2025, 5'9", 205 pounds. There's no Kendall Milton anymore at Georgia. There's no Dejon Edwards anymore. Branson Robinson, if that's a prospect you're familiar with because you're in Devy circles, it's probably a prospect you're familiar with if you're not in Devy circles, because there was a picture that went viral of him a long time ago because of just how bulking he was when he was like a junior in high school. But the point is Branson Robinson tore his patella tendon. So Branson Robinson that's a very major injury. So Branson Robinson might not be ready to take on a major workload. So Trevor Etienne really does transfer. He said this himself, and some people can say that maybe you shouldn't say things like yourself like this, but he said himself, I believe, in an interview, why would I be the number 2 running back for a team? He didn't say a team like Florida, but he said something like a team that's not competing when I can be the number 1 running back for a team, or maybe a number 1 running back for a team that's competing for national titles. I don't know exactly what he said, but it's pretty close to exactly that. And that is kind of what's going on here. He was splitting time at Florida, and I personally think he was the better NFL back a lot. I think the difference between him and Montrell Johnson was very much night and day, but Montrell Johnson got a lot of work. Montrell Johnson also, I'm not trying to say that there was something nepotistic, but Montrell Johnson is someone who followed Billy Napier from Louisiana. So he's been with that coach for a long time, and there is something about how running backs give you safety and consistency and make you feel comfortable with that could suggest that it makes sense for Billy Napier to roll with Montrell Johnson. But the point is, as Johnson did not go into the NFL, it made it more and more that Trevor Etienne was not getting more touches. And so now he's going from Florida to Georgia, and he's actually in a better position, I believe, to get a high volume of carries in the SEC. Because even though Georgia really doesn't lean on backs that much, again, the situation, they do have a freshman turning into a sophomore this year, Roderick Robinson. They always have a new freshman coming in. It is Georgia. But I do think Trevor Etienne is more situated than most running backs that we've seen in Georgia from recent memory to take on a big workload. I think a lot of times we say things like, they rotate a lot, and that's true, but when have they really had someone situated to have a big workload in recent memory? Because they have so many running backs at a high level. Now, again, Roderick Robinson is there as well, but Trevor Etienne, I think, is a very well situated running back to get a very good workload for Georgia. He's a very hard runner, forces a high degree of missed tackles, a very explosive player. He is 5'9" again, so he's a little on the shorter side, but the BMI is there, and he doesn't look too short to me. So really, he's at that point where there's probably some disadvantages of it too, but he almost gets a little bit of an advantage from the low center of gravity. He also doesn't have a huge passing volume, but PFF has him without a incompletion in his career. So to be clear, not even talking about drops, no incompletions, 30 of 30 in his career. That probably says something about the role he's in. He's probably in a role that is less likely generating, drops, screen passes, easy things, but it's still notable that he has 30 targets in his career and he has 30 receptions. So good thing for that for Trevor Etienne. So Trevor Etienne is one of the candidates for my RB5. Next up is Ollie Gordon, the running back from Oklahoma State, who would be 21 years, 8 months as of September 1st, 2025. He is 6'2", and the wiki listed weight is 212 pounds. I usually like to use the team listed weight, but they have it unlisted. I don't know what his weight is, but I honestly think 212 is probably light. He is a big running back. He was also an extremely productive running back with one of the craziest 3-game stretches you will see. Between games against Kansas, West Virginia, and Cincinnati, he had 721 rushing yards, 137 receiving yards, a grand total of 858 total yards, and 286 yards per game. But I think we're going to have to be a little bit controversial on this show with Ollie Gordon, given where I see him ranked in Devy leagues. Because as good as he's been, as productive as he's been, there are questions I have more than a lot of guys on this list about Ollie Gordon's explosiveness and athleticism that translates at the next level. Now, he's a very smooth strider, but it's just those first few yards. It's that upstart. It's those quick feet. I don't think he has very quick feet right away when he gets the ball. I don't know how he would run in a 40 because, again, he does accelerate very well once he gets the crease, once he gets to the open space. He accelerates very naturally and he becomes a very, very fast runner, especially when you adjust for how big he is at a runner. But his get off, his startup, his opening is a little slow for me. And so he's a little bit of a fade right now. Again, this is a market-based game. Most people here, if you're just tuning in because you enjoy listening to things ahead of schedule, it doesn't matter that much. So just watch Ollie Gordon, have fun watching Ollie Gordon, just consider my opinion on this, see if you disagree or agree. If you play in Devy leagues, I would strongly advise to not buy Ollie Gordon. This is a Devy league. You don't have to fade him. You don't have to throw him. If you have him, you don't have to throw him on the garbage, right? What I'm saying is where I see him ranked, there are players that I could trade down from, say, in a pick perspective, that someone wants Ollie Gordon and get a player that I like as much as Ollie Gordon or in the same tier as I like Ollie Gordon and make the profit there. So Ollie Gordon, he reminds me a little bit of Braylon Allen too, as a running back who I didn't like Braylon Allen as much. And again, I don't know where Braylon Allen got drafted. So this was going to be one of the first ones that's really wildly could be different based on where Braylon Allen got drafted, because I'm recording before the draft. But they're both bumper car running backs, but the way that they move, as in they sometimes they just hit people and bounce off of them like they're bumper cars. But the way they move doesn't really try to manipulate little angles all the time. Now, every now and then I'll see a little jump cut from Ollie Gordon that I really enjoy, but for the most part, I don't see the as consistent missed tackles as I would usually want to see at that size. And I think that also goes to that first step, because if he's not generating enough speed with his first step, he doesn't have the momentum he needs to break tackles. And again, I think that's really Ollie Gordon and Braylon Allen to me. They're both momentum tackle breakers more than guys who have really innate contact balance. And that's a very different thing to me. Now, I actually like Ollie Gordon. I was fading Braylon Allen this time last year too, but I actually like Ollie Gordon a lot better than I like Braylon Allen. I think he is a faster running back, and I think that there's a few things that I just like a little bit better in Ollie Gordon's profile. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong on that, but these are two players that I do consider similarly, so if you think I'm wrong about both, that makes sense too. But what I will say is that the next running back, who I'm going to bring up, is the power running back, is the big running back that I like the most, that I've seen the most out of, that I'm the most excited by, and that I would personally bet on. If you're asking me between Braylon Allen, Ollie Gordon, and this guy, I would most rather bet on this guy, and that is Damian Martinez, the running back from Oregon State. He is 6 foot and he is also unlisted, but he has some listed weights on places like Wikipedia and 247 Sports that put him in the 216 to 230 pound range. I also believe that he has tweeted himself about being 230 pounds, so, trust the source, don't trust the source, whatever you want to say. He's a big running back, and no one who's going to turn on the tape is going to look at him and think that he's not a big running back. It will be 21 years, 7 months as of September 1st, 2025, and I think he's more explosive, has the better first step, has the quicker feet, has more natural contact balance, as opposed to just being powerful in momentum. Damian Martinez is the player I really, really like on this way. Every time I watch him, I walk away impressed from watching him. I am a little disappointed that, he said he was going to stay at Oregon State before Jonathan Smith left, and I think he might have transferred away from Oregon State if he hadn't already said that, because Jonathan Smith, being their head coach, is now the head coach at Michigan State, and also the supposed quarterback starting for Oregon State this year was supposed to be Aiden Childs. Aiden Childs is transferring to Michigan State to be with Jonathan Smith. I feel like Damian Martinez probably felt like he was a little locked into Oregon State, especially after he said he was staying. He also got in a little bit of trouble for a DUI with not alcohol, but the one that you can get in Colorado a lot. So you do have to be a little disappointed with the supposed competition level that he's going to be playing, as Oregon State was left out of the cold when the pack fell apart. At the same time, again, running back is this traits-driven position, and I believe his traits show really well on film, so that's why I'm a huge fan of Damian Martinez. I mentioned Ashton Jeanty. I think with his pass catching, Ashton Jeanty is my running back 4 and the closest to the top tier. If I'm saying, just to make it an even for 5, the top competition for the 5th spot is between Trevor Etienne and Damian Martinez for me. The next running back is a running back I like quite a bit and would have been very high in my running back rankings had he declared this year, because he's the second running back on this list that would not be an early declare in Kansas's Devin Neal. Devin Neal would be 22 years, 1 month as of September 1st, 2025, and he is 5'11", 215 pounds. If you want, at least in my opinion, if you want a straight comparison from Devin Neal that's going to be very hot right now, it's going to be Jalen Wright. I felt fairly similarly about these players, and Jalen Wright was a player that I liked quite a bit even before the hype started going. At my very first ranking that listed running backs outside of the top 2, Jalen Wright was my running back 3. Now, Devin Neal, I don't know if he's as fast as Jalen Wright or not, but he does explode and accelerate very, very fast. And that 215 pounds, in the same way that Jalen Wright, that's a lean 215, right? I'm not saying he's small, but this says he's 1 pound away from Trey Benson. And if that's true, something weird's happening in just the way that they are built and look. And obviously, there's all kinds of things that go into how much someone actually weighs, but would have been very young if he would have come out this year. He would have been one of the youngest running backs in the class. And I also think there's a sentiment that you can't say that somebody has like any kind of emotional or any kind of attachment to a college football program anymore because of NIL. And I think that's just the stupidest crap ever. I don't care that, yes, Trevion Henderson and Devin Neal got the bag, okay? They got paid money. I'm not saying they didn't get paid money. But Trevion Henderson probably does not return to Ohio State if he does not have a good relationship with his coaches still. I do not think Devin Neal returns to Kansas if he is not this guy who is a Kansas kid. He was a surprise to go to Kansas in the first place. A lot of people thought he would leave the state and go to a better football program on paper. He stayed at Kansas and has been part of a building Kansas program for the last 3 years that has taken Kansas from the doormat of the Big 12 into a team that people expect to compete for bowls regularly. Like that's the expectation of this team next year, is to be in a bowl game because of how good of a job Lance Leipold has done. And it's not just the fact that the team has played well. There have been 2 major victories against Texas and Oklahoma in the time Devin Neal was there, and he was a major factor in both of them, including as a freshman against Texas, the game that they beat Texas a couple years ago. Devin Neal was a freshman, and in that game he had 24 carries, 143 yards, 3 touchdowns, and he also caught 2 passes for 26 yards for another touchdown. So he had 167 total yards and 4 touchdowns as a young freshman against Texas. When he gets volume, he has been insane. The way that this is a very fast-paced team. The way that they use pace means that he does not get volume all that much. Every time he gets 20 carries, for the most part in his entire career, he has been insane. So Devin Neal is a player I like quite a bit. It's always going to be a question mark for me when someone who could have been an early declare chooses not to be an early declare, but maybe I'm just making up subjective excuses. Kansas is a big deal for Devin Neal, and I buy with how big he's been in the Texas game, with how big he's been in the Oklahoma game. It just might be a matter of staying in college. So I think there's a little bit of a tier break here now from the running backs I've talked about so far to the running backs I'm talking about now, other than Ollie Gordon. I wanted to talk about Ollie Gordon where I talked about him because of where the market ranks him. I think these are the running backs that I'm about to talk about that I would be tiering Ollie Gordon down to. So starting off, Katron Allen, the other running back from Penn State, also probably the more consistent running back from Penn State. Now, one thing to note right away, and again, ages can be wrong, especially like this far out for players that aren't that big of celebrities, but Katron Allen's listed age is 1 full year older than what you would expect for him being a potential early declare. He is listed at 22 years, 8 months, which is very close to, say, Trevion Henderson, and actually 7 months older than Devin Neal, who we just talked about. Now, again, Devin Neal would have been one of the younger prospects in his class if he would have been an early declare, so there's a little bit of a caveat there. But the fact of the matter is, Katron Allen can be an early declare. Devin Neal cannot, but Katron Allen is 7 months older than Devin Neal. Just kind of the weird things that happen sometimes. 5'11", 225 pounds. A lot of people, again, it's kind of the same thing that I talked about with the Trevion Henderson thing about how Ohio State fans sometimes really like to talk down Henderson and up Brian Williams, and I think that's because of how consistent he was, especially during that second year. And I think there's a little bit of a similarity, especially in, again, this second year between Singleton and Kaytron Allen, because Allen is the more consistent running back right now. He is a running back who is fairly highly regarded in prospect circles, and he is someone who has at least good traits in terms of burst, balance, and the ability to do a lot of the things you look for at the running back position for a guy who is 220 pounds. Gavin Sawchuk of Oklahoma is a true junior. He is 5'11", 195 pounds, but he does have a bigger upper body than you would expect for a player like that. And I know I keep saying weird things like this, but the fact of the matter is you just look at sizes. If everyone's size was listed by the same measurements, we wouldn't have to do this. But Oklahoma might not have the same biases in how they're listing their size out than Kansas and Devin Neal do. And I think if you looked at Gavin Sawchuk, if you watch Gavin Sawchuk's film and you watch Devin Neal's film back to back, there's no way you're saying that the Kansas kid's 20 pounds heavier. You're just not. That's my opinion. Maybe you think I'm wrong with that. But Gavin Sawchuk, another player who has speed for days. Now, I don't think Gavin Sawchuk is as quick on the first step as a player like Devin Neal. That is why Devin Neal is a player that I like more than Gavin Sawchuk. And I couldn't find an age for Gavin Sawchuk, but again, he is a true junior. So I don't think he hits the ground at the quickest pace as someone like Devin Neal, but his speed is very legitimate. His ability to accelerate to get to his top speed, and for his top speed is one of the higher top speeds you're going to find. He absolutely flies. I don't know if I talk about how I don't really look for vision in these running backs at this stage, because I think it would just take too long. There's way too many running backs here, and I would need to get all 22 to do that, and I would really need to break down things. I would really need to conceptualize things that I don't want to do as much. Vision is just way harder. I think it takes a way more dedication per player to judge vision. But what I can say is you can judge timidity or a lack of patience when you're watching a running back. And I think what Gavin Sawchuk, because Gavin Sawchuk had a really good end of season stretch. He had 100 yards in almost every game down the stretch for Oklahoma. He really started breaking out. And I think what he developed as a runner isn't necessarily high-end vision. It just seems like he's kind of like that old school, gets the ball, waits for a second, and then just takes the best angle he can get. And he's so fast, it works really well, especially at a team like Oklahoma, who's got a pretty talented offensive line. I don't know if this is necessarily a beginning of his development. I don't know if I'm making too much of this, but it is important to note that he's finding things that work for him as well, right? So this is just something to keep in mind with Gavin Sawchuk. I don't have him ranked super highly in my lists, but someone who has his long speed and is putting up the numbers he is, even if long speed is not the most important thing to me, he has ridiculous speed and he's starting to put up numbers. Next up, one of the older running backs on this list, Raheem Rocket Sanders, the running back from South Carolina, who used to be with Arkansas. He would be 23 years, 3 months as of September 1st, 2025, and he is listed by Arkansas at 6'2", 242 pounds. He was listed by a lot of people going into last year as a top running back prospect in the class, and he was pretty much the consensus top 2 running back with Travion Henderson for a lot of early rankings last year. Sanders did add some weight before the year and he might have gotten too big, but regardless of that, his biggest problems were injury and the situation with Arkansas and a poor offensive line in the SEC. Now, my big problem with his transfer is that he transferred to a school who has a lot of similar issues, or had a lot of similar issues last year that Arkansas had. They weren't quite as bad as the offensive line, but the last 2 years, one of the most consistent narratives from South Carolina was that the offensive line has not been that good, and this is, again, a team that's still playing in the SEC. It's also Lenora Sellers is a very exciting quarterback, the South Carolina quarterback. He's someone you're going to see a lot of highlights from most likely, but it's kind of the same thing with KJ Jefferson, is that it's just maybe an inconsistent quarterback who adds a rushing dynamic. Now, maybe Lenora Sellers can be better than that, but there's a very similar thing going on here where you also have the rushing quarterback there. So maybe Raheem Sanders has the year that he had his second year, right? He had 1,500 yards in the SEC in his second year. He needs to have that kind of season again this year in the SEC once again to start to get his stock back. He's a big guy. I think he does a lot of small nuanced things better than a lot of the other big backs around. But my number one reason why I didn't think that he was going to go back to school was that he was a little bit old for being a junior. And now you're really seeing that show up in the fact that he's going to turn 23 now before the start of his rookie year if he comes out in 2025. So that's not a huge deal, but when you're projecting him in this class that has so many great running backs, it's hard to not make anything about that. So next up, Omarion Hampton, the North Carolina running back who had a huge season of 1,500 yards, 29 receptions, and 222 receiving yards. He'd be 22 years, 5 months as of September 1st, 2025. He is 6 foot even, 220 pounds. He is a player who runs angry and checks a lot of objective boxes. He's also the player I'm probably the most conflicted with. I think that, in my opinion, he just doesn't run with the best pace and patience. I think he's a little bit one note, just get ball and run. And that can obviously have some limitations, especially because at 220 pounds, the more nuance you can add, the more small things you can add to your game, those can go a long way at 220 pounds, and in the ability to, make defenders miss at the second level and get a little bit more yards than you should be able to get at the line of scrimmage. I think these are some things that Omarion Hampton can potentially improve on. Again, I'm probably nitpicking a little bit, but this is the kind of running back class where you have to answer the questions of why is a 220 pound guy who put up 1,500 yards last year not in your top 5, and clearly not in your top 5. So if I'm answering some of those questions, that's what it is. But Omarion Hampton is also a very exciting guy who has explosive speed, was a highly regarded high school recruit, and really started putting it on statistically. He's also someone who North Carolina might have to lean on quite a bit more when you consider the fact that Drake May is gone. Now, I've also heard a lot of people around college think that team might not be very good this year. So it'll be interesting to see how he does if that's the state of the team. But moving on to DJ Giddens out of Kansas State, another big running back, 22 years old as of September 1st, 2025, 6'1", 212 pounds, and he's a really tough runner. I like him. He's one of my biggest risers from just watching the film a little bit more from each of these players, because, obviously it's not that he's it's not that he's better than a lot of these players, just that from what I was expecting going in, a lot of these guys, even the guys that are ranked higher, they matched my expectations, right? My expectations for Ashton Janty were already super high because he's a player that I've been developing, say, fandom for a long time. DJ Giddens is a player who I had not been super high on going into the process. He's just a player that I had seen crop up in a couple of Devy rankings. And he was the guy that I came away impressed with. And he was the guy who, especially among the bigger running backs, I saw the translation a little bit better in the lateral movement and the ability to manipulate a little bit more angle and to generate a little bit more of those missed force tackles. Now, Kansas State is a system that has consistently created rushing success. It is systematic a little bit. It is rushing quarterback based a little bit. And that is something worth keeping in mind. But he did end the season with 4 straight 100-yard games, 482 yards, 3 touchdowns. And so DJ Giddens, I don't necessarily think he has the upside to get into that top 5, but he is someone that I am rising on. Some more quick hitters. Donovan Edwards will be 22 years, 6 months as of September 1st, 2025, 6 foot 210. The big thing with Donovan Edwards is if he could improve his vision or feel for the game or his contact balance, either one, he's so explosive and he's such a good pass catcher that you could see it translate at the next level. I'm starting to lose hope that those two things are going to see improvement because we really haven't seen them improve at this point. But with Blake Corum leaving, we're going to see a little bit more of Donovan Edwards most likely. And a lot of people might not see the pass catching in the statistics, but the one thing I will say is that a lot of running backs have low ADOTs. Most running backs even have negative ADOTs. Donovan Edwards has had a season where he operated almost exclusively down the field. So Donovan Edwards has had more quality targets or difficult targets than a lot of running backs, even if he hasn't had enough screens to make the pass catching numbers look as good. There's also not much to talk about with Jordan James, the running back from Oregon, 5'10", 205 pounds, question mark on the age, could not find a date of birth. But PFF absolutely adores this guy, I guess is the main thing to say. Obviously, he came in as the backup for Bucky Irving. But, I've been actually interested in Jordan James as potentially being the more translatable NFL back for a while in the Oregon backfield. And that was kind of before he had these insane PFF numbers. Now, again, these are small sample numbers. He did it on 108 carries, but both the rate that he generated 10 plus carries and the rate he forced missed tackles were both very, very impressive. So Jordan James is a guy who's not listed that highly yet because we haven't seen it in a big sample. But if he, took what he did in those first 100 carries of his major career, starting in his second year, in his sophomore year, if he takes that first 100 carries and builds on it into his junior year, Jordan James is a guy who has the ability to move up and be closer to that running back 5 range. And then some more honorable mentions. LaQuint Allen, 6 foot, 195 pounds, from Syracuse. He absolutely dominates the share of his marketplace. It's a very big thing for a running back. He's a little undersized, but he is an early declare. So an early declare in the Power 5 who's dominating his marketplace is someone who generally should be kept an eye on. There's also Dylan Sampson of Tennessee and Jamarion Miller of Alabama. The main reason I don't want to talk about these guys as much is because everybody I have brought up on this show so far has a very good chance of being a starting running back and a featured starting running back for their team, with the possible exception that Henderson and Judkins and Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton play for the same team. Dylan Sampson and Jamarion Miller are two players who have the physical upside to be guys who climb the rankings, but we haven't actually seen any proof that they're going to even be the starters for their team. In fact, there's a significant chance that they would not be the starters for their team, depending on how you feel, say, about guys around them on the team, or guys behind them on the team, or guys that are younger than them on the team. So these are just two names to keep in mind, and Jamarion Miller and Dylan Sampson, who would be eligible for the 2025 draft and could explode up rankings if they get opportunities with these teams. So to wrap up this insane and insanely deep running back class, I've just named about 19 running backs. My favorites would be Nicholas Singleton, Trevion Henderson, Quinshon Judkins, Ashton Janty, Trevor Etienne, Damian Martinez, and Devin Neal. That would be my 7. Primarily, it's hard for me to really make up who's not in that 7. I think what I was saying earlier with Ollie Gordon, a lot of people would put Ollie Gordon in that 7, and I'm not sure I'm quite there yet. And then I also have Gavin Sawchuk, Katron Allen, and Jordan James, as well as potentially guys like Rocket Sanders, like DJ Giddens, like Omarion Hampton, that I have kind of in that same range. And so I would value Ollie Gordon closer to these guys. So I don't mean to talk about him too much, but he's the guy I'm most off the market on. And so if someone is taking this for Devy advice, that is the guy that I'm most off the market on. But in general, these are all players, even Ollie Gordon, who I do have a lot of excitement for. I like Ollie Gordon more than I liked a player like Braylon Allen last year. So this is a very, very, very exciting running back class. The full podcast, including a bit more context, can be found under the Fantasy for Real title wherever you get your podcasts. Goodbye.